So does Senator Paul have his facts mixed up, or is Dr. Fauci trying to deflect and dance around a little bit? The old Potomac two-step. We'll answer that question in tonight's Hold the Line. Friends, welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. It's one of the biggest stories in the world and one of the biggest ones in living memory. How did we get hit with this once-in-a-century pandemic? Was it just a natural occurrence, a freak of nature situation? Or was there a human hand in this? Was there actual gain-of-function research where they mess with viruses to make them more transmissible, to perhaps make them more deadly going on? And did that virus escape from a lab? Let's just, as we review where we are today, let's remember what Dr. Fauci, who now says no gain of function, oh my gosh, gain of function? We would never touch him, never think of such a thing. Here's what Fauci was saying about gain of function research back in 2013.
I think that where we are right now in science and molecular biology, and particularly molecular virology, and our ability to sequence and recombine and create various organisms in some respect, is that the best way to prevent a nefarious act is to develop a culture of responsibility among scientists. You have to have some restrictions in the sense of you don't do work that could actually hurt people, in the sense of if you have a laboratory accident, you have to have the right containment. Once you start being too restrictive, you then impede creativity for so many of the good things that could come out of the same type of work.
Don't want to impede that creativity around gain-of-function research and viruses, right? You don't want to get in the way of the maestro, don't want to get in the way of the genius of the international health policy community and researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, right? Interesting that that was his perspective almost 10 years ago. And yet, what does Dr. Fauci say now? Well, if he's pushed on the issue, if he receives a bit of criticism, he can get quite defensive. And that's what happened. Play the clip where Fauci and Paul are fighting.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly, and I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
Pretty harsh stuff, right? Someone's right and someone's wrong. Someone's telling the truth and someone's trying to gain points for their side at the expense of truth. And I think it's very important that we figure out exactly who and how and what's really going on here. Rand Paul certainly feels that way, which is perhaps why he has referred Dr. Fauci for possible criminal prosecution, a criminal referral to the Department of Justice against Fauci over the Wuhan lab, saying that Fauci lied to Congress, and it is in fact a crime to lie to Congress. So do we believe that this is going to go anywhere? Probably not. Do you think that in D.C. you could even get a jury to convict Fauci of anything? I mean, you couldn't get them to convict Fauci of a speeding ticket probably in Washington, D.C., never mind lying to Congress. But it makes the point nonetheless, and it forces people to ask the question, did Fauci lie? Or is Fauci telling the truth? We should know the answers to this. Because let's remember, the people who were in the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic determining for all of us what the origins of this were and saying that they knew and that it was a conspiracy theory, one that big tech needed to weigh in on to make sure it didn't get too much play, too much oxygen out there. We were told it was a big conspiracy, and then And then it turned out that wasn't the case. But if we had known that at the beginning, if we had known that Fauci and the rest around him, as they circled the wagons to make sure that the lab leak theory was not the predominant one, but in fact the natural origin of the wet market theory was what the scientific community's so-called consensus was all about, that would have made us feel very differently, most likely, about a lot of the other pronouncements that the Fauciites made about what we all have to do. And now everyone, let's be clear, including members of the Biden administration at the top level, are taking the lab leak quite seriously. Here's from CNN. Biden officials overseeing an intelligence review into the origins of the coronavirus. They now believe the theory the virus accidentally escaped from a lab in Wuhan is at least as credible as the possibility that it emerged naturally in the wild, a dramatic shift from a year ago when Democrats publicly downplayed the so-called lab leak theory. Let's remember something else. The lab leak theory would have meant that there was a lot of blame specifically for China, but also for international health policy collaboration and the kind of globalist health policy community that you would see in the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the connections to the NIH. So there was going to be blame there. And what do the Democrats want to do? They wanted to blame Donald Trump for the whole thing. The COVID-19 disaster had to be Trump's fault in 2020 so they could put the doddering buffoon Joe Biden in the Oval Office as his replacement. So whatever they had to say, whatever stories they had to tell to achieve that end, they felt were inherently justified. But not only are Democrats taking the lab leak hypothesis seriously, there are left-wing or Democrat-aligned journalists out there who are saying, yeah, guys, Fauci's actually on really shaky ground here. This was Josh Rogan. Hey, guys, Rand Paul was right and Fauci was wrong. The NIH was funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan, but NIH pretended it didn't meet their gain-of-function definition to avoid their own oversight mechanism. Sorry, not sorry, if that doesn't fit your favorite narrative. So here's a person, was he a Washington Post guy, I think. Here's somebody who is saying straight up, Fauci is wrong. And if Fauci's wrong, given what he's been saying and the vociferous way in which he says it, it's fair to think that maybe Fauci's not just wrong, he's lying. And Dr. Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, may have seen all along what's really going on here. Never forget, the great hero of Democrats in the early days of the pandemic was Governor Cuomo of New York, who ended up with one of the worst records and a history of lying and changing numbers and doing everything he could to manipulate the circumstance. With Dr. Fauci, we're not there yet, but eventually I'm hoping we'll get to the place where we realize this guy was the biggest disaster to come out of any federal bureaucracy in the history of the United States government.